my experience as a child prodigy in music, of a very strong sense of consciousness, very strong sense of being more than my physical self. And so I always suspected that there must be more to us than our body and nervous system and brain. And so I started looking into the question when I was in my mid-20s, perhaps even earlier 20s, but really seriously in my mid-20s. But I said the hunch that consciousness is not reducible to the brain, and that there's more to it and more to life also than just the cells working together. And that is a conviction or a hunch, as I say, that I've always had as far back as I can remember. Certainly into my late teens, but as I said, in my mid-20s, I thought I'll start looking into it seriously.
So what was your first activities in the research of consciousness? Because it is a very difficult subject to, I suppose, especially empirically research, due to the nature of subjectivity of consciousness. So what was your first research into consciousness? What did you do?
Well, I mean, I didn't do systematic research. I mean, I was a musician, professional concert pianist. So that was taken up all my interest and time, formally at least. But on my own personal level, I was intrigued, of course, interested in this subject. And I started reading whatever came to mind, whatever came to hand. People referring me to their work or to things out to read. And my own. And when I started being interested in it, I talked to people, then more and more people came back to me with their ideas and their suggestions. So I just started inquiring on my own to satisfy my curiosity. It was not a kind of a controlled scientific research.
What kind of experiences did you find the most interesting that related to the subject of consciousness?
Now, when I started looking into it, I found that there is a lot of evidence that there is consciousness also beyond the brain, the absence of brain function. And that there could be consciousness awareness, which is not strictly a product of the brain. Now, when you're playing music, when you're doing music, of course, then you are very strongly involved when everything is working fine, when you're not working or involved with the mechanics of what you're playing. That's when you can let go and get into it. It's like getting into poetry or art or dance or anything of the kind. Then you get into another domain, another field of sensations around you. And that I always cultivated, and I felt that there is a harmony, there is some basic underlying oneness, perhaps, in the world. These are in the world, but these are later concepts that came to me. At the time, I was just intrigued by the fact that there is more to us than that shows up in the analysis of the brain.
Certainly, the first subject that really got my interest was something called veridical perception in near-death experiences, where people who are shown to be a flat EEG, so no brain activity, are able to apparently perceive what's going on around them. What was your thought of that phenomena when you first saw it?
Well, I came to that later on. I mean, when I started looking into this, near-death experiences were not even named as such, I don't think, and they were certainly not widespread, not widely known. There were clinical anecdotes about them, but not much serious research. So when I heard about it, it didn't surprise me. And I thought that's something very interesting and important. And I was wondering whether Obama has strong intuitive experiences whether those can be reduced down to brain function, or they also have their own roots someplace else. And the idea that the brain is not a producer of consciousness, but a transmitter came later. But when I thought of that, when I came to that, then I felt that is probably the right tack to investigate. It's probably the brain is not the source of our consciousness, but it's like nowadays. It was when I started this, in my mid-20s, in the late 50s, let's say. These electronic devices of transmission and all that. There was this radio transmission, television transmission. There was telephone lines, but very often running through the cords, through the cables. So there was not so widespread information about how information can be transmitted through the ether and through the atmosphere, But when I heard about that more and more, then I said, yes, so this is likely to be the case, that there is an information field. And when I came up with the notion of field, then of course that rang a bell. And many people started pushing me to talk about what in the tradition was called the Akashic field. Did I feel that what I perceive as a beyond the brain field is something like that the ancients talked about? And then I started looking into that, and I found, yes, that it seems to satisfy my hunches about what there could be behind these phenomena.
So the Akashic record is essentially, I suppose, a cosmic database of experience, isn't it? Of I suppose, yes, maybe not only human experience, but also animal experience.
Well, experience is the sense of whatever is happening, whatever takes place. I mean, if the quanta are joining together to form an atom, that's something that's happening in the universe. And obviously, the whole evolutionary process, this also came later to me, the whole notion that things are not what they were, things are what they are now, is what they have evolved into. And that this evolution is also affecting, or is part of the consciousness. Consciousness is also not what is just simply given once and for all, but it's something that evolves over time, and it's part of a larger process. All these thoughts came crystallized later on, but initially my feeling and my hunches and my experience in music and in other forms of art, obviously, when it's opening up to this kind of experiences, it showed me that there's bound to be more. There's bound to be more than the physiological or physical interactions that the sciences and mainstream sciences in those days talked almost exclusively of that, and were rather being against it or distrusting that there should be anything more than that.
Yes, there does certainly seem to be a contrast between, I suppose, the artists of the world, I suppose the right brain dominant individuals, and the left brain scientific, logical point of view, who the artists will inherently feel a connection to their work and often to the earth and the universe in general. You hear that a lot. Whereas the scientists and the critical, I suppose, left brain individuals will often dismiss that as fantasy with no evidence to support that kind of thing. And unfortunately, that seems to be the dominant view in the Western world, especially.
Well, that's what I call the old paradigm, the mainstream paradigm, which is still dominant in many circles, but not in the forefront, not in the avant-garde. I mean, when you really are into this phenomena, then you know that you have to go further than just the Newtonian ideas of mass points interacting in space and time. That there is more to it. So I think the choice is not either science or spirituality or these experiences, being either to be debunked as being just illusion, or being completely changing our conception of what the brain is, what the mind is, what consciousness is. But it's not a divisive line, not either or. Science, if it's true and good science, is embracing the deeper field domains of human experience. And I think we have advantage of a reflective consciousness, that we not only perceive the world around us, but we can also look at that perception, identify it, and consider what it is. And then we can come to conclusions based on evidence and based on intuition as well. Intuition being, I agree with Einstein, at least as important, if not more important than reasoning. Intuition coming from experience, not just wild speculation, but based on what we really feel, that and in the depths of our own consciousness, we feel the presence of consciousness, which is not reducible uniquely to the brain function.
Although it's correlated certainly very closely to it. And I suppose that's where the confusion often comes, is when we know that if we change parts of the brain, parts of or our ability to perceive or interpret things changes. And I suppose the mainstream view of that is the confusion between correlation and causation. Although there does seem to be a recent synthesis between science and spirituality in the realms of quantum mechanics, or at least there seems to be a perception that is the case. Have you dived very deeply into quantum consciousness and theories?
Well, I become more and more aware of that. We can't explain this phenomena except with the same kind of concepts that show up in the quantum field, because the examination, the analysis of the micro domains of the physics of the universe come up with a phenomena that is very strongly suggestive of the spiritual domain, the phenomena of interconnection and memory and mutual causation, co-evolution, as the Buddhists would say, creative co-evolution. All of these sort of things coming up on the new quantum physics, the new quantum cosmology, and it's now entering quantum brain research. So consciousness research benefits a great deal from the enlarged framework that we get when we take seriously the phenomena that is coming to sight, coming to life, coming to the fore at the leading edge of the investigation of the very large and of the very small. We are at an in-between domain, at the meso-domain. And we think that the whole rest is like this. Actually, we are just experiencing a very small segment of all the frequencies, of all the phenomena that is experienceable around us. We're just taking a very little bit. And that little bit is convenient since 250 years of Newton or so to examine that in terms of mechanical causation and the mechanistic laws of nature. And that explains a lot of the surface phenomena, I would say surface phenomena of the surface of the Earth. But when you go beyond that, then of course you see that you can't explain the phenomena with those concepts. You have to go further. And then the actual laboratory experiences are at the new quantum physics level of non-locality, for example. This instant interconnection is such that it really blows apart the framework, the rigid framework of the old Newtonian paradigm, which, by the way, just in all fairness to Newton, was not Newton's paradigm, not Newton's thinking. It was his followers who blew it up into a whole worldview. Newton was a deeply spiritual person. His writings, still conserved in the British Museum, illustrate how actually looking for all kinds of spiritual phenomena for explication.
And it certainly does seem to mirror a lot of the world's orthodox religions as well, in the sense that there was an original kind of teaching, whether it be Newton's theories or Jesus's teachings, that people then got hold of, reinterpreted, and made into this worldview from a teaching that was very general to begin with.
Well, it's a good thing to start with something, but as long as one doesn't blow it up and make it into everything, start is what we can experience with our senses. Fine, that's what the positivist philosophers have been trying to do, and everything else is what they call metaphysics. The famous Vienna Circle philosophers of the early 20th century. If you called your ideas metaphysics, that means pejorative, that means bunk, that no validity. But then this expansion of our worldview is came about because the experiments, and then the protocoled experiences are much wider than could be explained by that narrow mechanistic space-time material energy framework.
And you mentioned that all of that, the material aspects, seems to only constitute the very surface level of existence. And I know that a guy who works at the Monroe Institute, William Buhlman, has described it as kind of the epidermis layer of reality. So what would you say, if you could very briefly kind of describe, because I know it's often beyond explanation, but what would constitute the majority of reality that's maybe invisible to the material senses?
Frequency. Tesla said that already. If you're really interested to find out what there is in the world, then look at it in terms of frequency, because frequency refers to vibration, propagating vibration, wave phenomena. And I think the wave aspect of reality is the fundamental aspect. But there is ultimately, if you want to reduce it, I don't like the word, but we're talking about trying to account for it in some basic really level. What you have to take into account is that it's all interacting wave phenomena, which we can try to understand in terms of wave functions and coherence between the waves, non-locality, phenomena of in-phase waves, merging together and forming larger patterns, and creating the complex phenomena that we are now not only experiencing, but believing really is underlying the world. So the world is wave, is energy, informed energy, to use the term that David Bohm brought into being. It's information written with a hyphen. And if you ask me, and I've written that in several of my books, what there is in the book, I would say informed energy. So information is basic, but information is carried by something. It doesn't just float in thin air. Also, it's in the ether, which is thinner than any thinner. But it is carried by something which is energy, not energy in any physical manifest form where we can measure it and make it run through coils and create electricity and all that. Energy in a more fundamental, basic sense, in which it is an effective agent, something that is happening in the world, something that creates what we experience, something which is closest to the old idea of matter, but it's not rigid and it's not local. It's non-local, it's universal, and it's highly interacting and interconnected, and universal in all its respects. It's a field. The universe is an energy, informed energy field. That's how I would phrase it.
I suppose I wonder, what's your opinion on those who experience what they would describe as astral landscapes and astral planes, I suppose, where their imagination, their consciousness is much more causal and much more rapidly effective on the environment. Have you looked much into that subject?
Well, the causal effects has been studied today by brain research, by psychotherapists, by a lot of whole new group of people who are believing that mind has an effect in the world. And it's not just through the brain, but the fact that you can affect each other through the ether, through the field, I would say, through the Akashic field. So there is bulk of today's avant-garde research into brain and mind and reality is dealing with the mutual effect of phenomena that we used to call spiritual phenomena or mental phenomena that we now recognize is really part of the reality of the world. I wouldn't say physical reality because it's a metaphysical reality at the same time. It's an encompassing reality in which the physical is an expression of the spiritual. Not everything that's spiritual is obviously true or reducible or accountable in terms of physical phenomena. There's a lot of imagination and a lot of just unfounded speculation around and about. But when you get into deep intuitive experience, that is bound to have a basis in reality. And that reality is informed energy. So someplace, the frequency that we pick up, the frequencies, the domains of frequency, which is very, very small little segment of the overall frequencies that are given in this field. And who knows how much more we'll be discovering in the coming years. So it's a great temptation to say that this is how the world is, just because this is the part that we can understand, we can experience, in some way account for. But if we start with the idea that reality is not reducible to matter-like interactions, but it's really an informational phenomena, an information which is carried in by a cosmic form of energy that we can not properly call matter, but call something with existence and existent. It's difficult to name these things, already.
Certainly.
The English physicist, what's his name? Not David Bohm, I'll come to think of it so well. The Copenhagen School of Quantum Physics.
Right. Yeah.
And he's already came up with the notion of, pointed out that we cannot name these phenomena, not in terms of everyday concepts. So we better accept it and deal with it, and without trying to concretize it in terms that are reducing its richness and reducing its extent.
So when you say that information is kind of the fundamental level of existence, informed energy, what would you say? Would you say that is facilitated by consciousness? Would you say that consciousness is fundamental? Is that fundamental information?
I think information is fundamental. If you can talk about something, there are patterns of this universal energy, cosmic energy, which express effect, which affect others, whether affect others, other phenomena, and jointly create the reality which is around us. So it's basic. You can't get beyond it. Schrödinger said you can't get beyond consciousness because whatever you look for, it's always in terms of consciousness. The same thing with information. You can't get beyond it. Whatever you do, it's always comes back to being information. And if you try to reduce it to information that's communicated through a channel, then you're again not doing it justice. Information is the relationship, is the structure which is given in the cosmos, And it is that structure which is the basis for our existence and is the basis for our experience. So ultimately, you get down there, and you can't say that it is derived from something else. There is an information field, and that information field began to evolve, to articulate itself, to integrate its elements, and to create complexity and coherence, probably as far as we know, but it's also not 100% certain. As far as we can now guess, it started a process that started at 13.8 billion years ago. But whether it started at the process or the process was a phase in its evolution, we don't know. But we can now make some sense of the physical phenomena by assuming that it has started evolving into what it is at the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago.
One analogy that I heard, which seemed to kind of bring the concept of information into a clearer viewpoint, at least for me, was the analogy of a compute on a computer screen. You have an icon which runs a script, and in the background you've got the system of binary code which runs that script and is represented by that icon. So I suppose the analogy is that the information behind that icon and how it functions is the fundamental level of information in reality, and the icon on the desktop screen is what we see, how it's represented.
Well, I mean, Plato said 2,500 years ago that what we see are shadows in the wall, and that's the same function as what you are talking about. I mean, we are seeing something which is a surface phenomena. There is something that is beyond it, that is its source, and that we don't perceive as such. We can only infer into, and that's the sort of the source, the flame, the fire. Plato said in the cave that is behind us, which we don't see directly, but we see the shadows. And what we perceive are some kind of shadows. I mean, you are using holographic ideas also. You can see that those are holographic segments, manifested by some energy, illuminating it perhaps, and coming to life and coming to experienceable levels. But what there is this deeper level which we can infer, which we can also intuit and sense. I'm convinced that our deepest intuitions reflect something which is beyond what our senses can perform and can perceive.
Certainly. So I suppose the main question that I focus on would be, what is your opinion on what you've discovered, its implications of what our experience will be, if any, after physical death? Because I think that is the fundamental question of humanity, because it's the only certain thing to happen to all of us.
It's in the continuity of consciousness. That's the basic item. If consciousness is not produced by the brain, not completely produced by the brain, it could be elaborated by the brain. But if consciousness is a cosmic phenomenon, which is a hologram of which the human brain, in fact, most any organized system of wave patterns is a translator, is a transformer. Then, of course, this basic information field is you can say permanent. It's not a product of evolution. It's not a product of anything that happened in evolution. It's something which is basic to the universe, informed energy. But information produced is consciousness. I wouldn't want to say mechanically produced, but the information in a structured way is consciousness. And it is something which the human brain transfers, translates, and manifests, provided it's tuned to a broader frequency
So
than the everyday.
very much like a transceiver on a radio.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
Mm.
You have to
Because
get onto the broad frequencies beyond the sense perceivable aspect of reality.
and there are those who during near-death experiences, but also during, I suppose, some spiritual experiences of meditation and out-of-body experience, or as some people call it, astral projection, who have claimed to have, I suppose, visited, for want of a better word, these other frequencies, which they believe is the afterlife realms. What's your thought on that kind of experience?
Well, every experience that is actual experience is indubitable. It's something that happened. Explaining it is another matter. We may or may not be able to explain it. Maybe we haven't come across it. Maybe nonplussed by it. But we not to give up. If something is experienced, is a factor. Now, it may not be what we think it is, but certainly the fact that we experience something shows that there is something to be experienced. And that's as far as we go. And we can experience, apparently we can experience consciousness beyond the physical brain, beyond the functioning of the physical brain. And the evidence is really overwhelming on that. It seems to be that there is a level of consciousness also beyond physical death, all these after-death experiences. And they sometimes so veridical, so confirmable. There's a whole series of experiences written down. They include experiences by Bertrand Russell, the famous skeptical British philosopher, as well as Oriental sages and many, many more. So there is clearly some experience continuing independently of the functioning of the physical brain that has transformed it up till now, up in our lifetime. It continues, and it can be reassociated with experiences that are produced by other physical brains, evolving, coming perhaps from an early stage of the evolution in an embryonic stage, but being reassociated, and these experiences continue because the hologram, which is the informed energy field of the cosmos, it is not a transitory phenomenon, not a finite phenomenon. It is something which exists, persists, continues. At one time, some of the time, at some places, it's transferred, it's opened as though it was. This is a metaphor that I also read, because well taken. It's as if the eye of the cosmos would be then opening or then closing again. But it's something which is, when we bring a translator, a transformer to work at that field, and then you have the phenomenon that grasp. But the phenomena themselves that produces it, those phenomena exist, and those are continuous and evolving.
There's just one point I'd like to pick up on before we finish that you mentioned that I agree with, that there is overwhelming evidence of consciousness without brain function. I suppose because I come at this from a very scientific background, just the way I am, I always look for empirical things like this. And a lot of people would strongly disagree with that assertion. So what do you think constitutes the overwhelming evidence of consciousness without brain function?
Well, the most concrete kind of evidence is when people, we can call them spiritual, people who may have already been dead, but anyway, they manage to get messages across, which are very, very unlikely to have been produced by some other mind or consciousness, which will be difficult to come across by others. I've collected some of this in a book called The Immortal Mind. With Anthony Peake.
Anthony Peake, yeah.
And there's a lot of it, a lot of evidence there we can describe. There's more coming every day. So I think that's the had the manifest given to hand evidence, But if we allow our mind, our consciousness to penetrate deeper, then our intuition will tell us that consciousness that we perceive is a small segment. It's a holographic fragment of the overall hologram, which is the universe as in its totality.
Okay, so which, if people want to learn more about your work and your research and your interests, which books would you recommend that they look to, or which resources should they look to?
Well, quite a few books, in fact. Probably if you look at the published titles, published more than 100 different books that appear under my name. And some of them appear in different languages, 24 languages. The most recent one is going to be published, recent in terms of my research. It's going to be published on the 28th of September, which is called The Wisdom Principles by St. Martin's Press, which is Macmillan. And I tried to just distill those few ideas, those little nuggets, which occurred to me on the basis of my intuitions and experiences and interpretations, to be relevant and truthful. And I just state that in the form of little metaphors, 1 or 2 pages each, sometimes just half a page, and 2 headings. One is the non-temporary, eternal truth, as it were, because that we're dealing, which is true independently of this place and time in which we are dealing with it. And then the timely truth also, which is particularly occurs as relevant to our present moment in history, in our evolution. But the basic truths are eternal and non-conditioned by space and time. And so the Wisdom Principles is one such book. And I've written too many to be able to list even most of them, but another book I wrote, which is relevant to this, is perhaps I'll say first, is the non-local universe, the interconnected universe, and the information field. I have to look up those titles precisely, but an important one is what I call now my journey, which is an autobiographical one, which I'm trying to answer many of the questions that you are posing, because I pose them myself. And this My Journey is going to be published next month, in the middle of October, 18th of October.
Great.
But it goes deep down. So physical science books, the interconnected universe, for example, is that. And then the spiritual books, this non-local, immortal mind, and now the Wisdom Principles. So
they're the books to go to.
Some ideas, and they are all available on through the internet, on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other fields.
And of course, you have the work of your institute, the Laszlo Institute. Would you like to just briefly describe what that does?
Well, I feel with my colleagues that change is continuous, but not smooth. It comes in peaks and valleys and troughs, and change is coming in a very non-local fashion. Progress is also coming. It comes through crisis very often. Right now, there is a leap, which we can call metaphorically as a kind of a quantum leap in our ideas of who we are and what the world is. Some of the things that we have been discussing for the past half hour. And these actually constitute a new paradigm for our thinking about reality, about our existence in the world, about the reasons for our being here. And to promote this new paradigm openly, not as a dogma, but as something that we want to look into and explore together, I have founded an institute which carries my name, but it's called more exactly the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research. And here we can explore systematic work in any aspect of the new paradigm. The most recent one that I'm just now working on the proceedings of was last month, and we did an international symposium on the new paradigm in politics. Politics, as you probably realize and agree, is badly, badly in need of rejuvenation and reformation. It's a very old-fashioned politics still, which is creating all these fragmentations and diseases and this perfectly unacceptable conditions in the world, dangerous conditions also. So a new paradigm in politics is one aspect. We are going to have a seminar, a symposium on health and issues of health, as well as on consciousness. And even thinking of now going into the very widest domains, the original domains, the cosmology. How did the universe come into being? Can that tell us something about what the universe is and who we are as part of the universe? So these are lots and lots of areas for research into a new paradigm. This new paradigm is being disregarded and dismissed by very conservative, narrow-minded elements. But many of those have been shaken up. There is more opening, more openness to look at phenomena in their own terms. And so I think the Institute has become more relevant than we expected it to be even a few years ago when I founded it. And so I hope that open-minded, inquiring people, seeking people, as you say, will be joining our work. We welcome that. We'd like to carry on this work jointly in a cooperative fashion. It's important for us, both in terms of understanding the world and understanding ourselves, and in terms of living in this world, not destroying each other and in conditions that make life possible in this world. All of these are highly in question.
A very important work. Certainly the world is in need of a new, more healthy paradigm.
Indeed it is.
Okay.
I appreciate your inquiry, your undertaking about seeking the phenomena of life and understanding
I
consciousness.
appreciate it. I appreciate it.
It is fundamental. It has to be open.
I think especially
rewarding also.
Yes, I think especially the phenomena of death, especially in the West, is unfortunately is ignored or tried to be hidden away, whereas it is the most fundamental or the most guaranteed experience of all of us, and I think the most fundamental question that needs to be answered.
Exactly. It's who we are. It's the most difficult question. As the oracle at Delphi also said, know who you are. That's the most difficult one, because we are very much an expression of the totality of this world. And we cannot delimit that. And this is life and that's not life. This is matter, that's not matter. There is no such thing. There is no otherness. There is nothing outside of this overall information field which produces a phenomena and which evolves and becomes more and more complex, more and more rich, and to which we can continue. And exploring that is the greatest challenge we can accept, we can face, and also is the most exciting and rewarding one.